There is a $2 solution that restores dead car batteries to working condition. Batteries that a mechanic would tell you need to be replaced for $100 to $200. Not every dead battery, not batteries with physical damage or shorted cells. But the most common reason car batteries fail, a process called sulfation, is reversible through chemistry that costs $2 and has been documented in automotive and electrochemical literature for decades. The automotive battery replacement market in the United States generates approximately $500 million per year in retail sales alone, not counting the labor charges for professional installation. Interstate, Optima, Die Hard, and their competitors sell replacement batteries at prices ranging from $80 to over $200, depending on the vehicle and battery specifications. The active ingredient in the restoration method is magnesium sulfate, sold in every pharmacy and garden center as Epsom salt for $3 to $5 per pound. Dissolved in distilled water and introduced into a failing lead-acid battery, it addresses the specific chemical mechanism that causes the majority of premature battery failures. This is not a folk remedy that circulates on YouTube without scientific basis. Magnesium sulfate battery restoration is documented in technical literature, used by fleet vehicle maintenance operations, and applied by mechanics who have learned through experience that a $2 treatment frequently extends battery life by years. This is the story of what sulfation is, why it kills batteries, how magnesium sulfate reverses it, and why the battery industry would prefer you never connect these facts. To understand why the Epsom salt method works, you need to understand what a lead-acid battery actually is and what goes wrong when it dies. A lead-acid battery, the type in virtually every conventional gasoline and diesel vehicle manufactured in the last century, consists of lead plates submerged in a solution of sulfuric acid and water called the electrolyte. The chemical reaction between the lead plates and the sulfuric acid produces electrical energy during discharge and is reversed by electrical energy during charging. During discharge, both the positive and negative lead plates react with the sulfuric acid to form lead sulfate, a white crystalline compound that deposits on the surface of the plates. During charging, this lead sulfate is supposed to be converted back into lead and lead dioxide on the respective plates, releasing sulfuric acid back into the electrolyte. This reversible cycle, lead sulfate forming during discharge, lead sulfate dissolving during charging, is the fundamental chemistry that makes a rechargeable battery rechargeable. As long as the cycle proceeds normally, the battery continues to accept and release charge. Sulfation is what happens when this cycle breaks down. When a battery is discharged and not promptly recharged, or when it is chronically undercharged, as happens when a vehicle is used primarily for short trips that don't allow the alternator to fully recharge the battery, the lead sulfate that formed during discharge does not fully dissolve during the incomplete charging cycle. It remains on the plate surface. Over time, this undissolved lead sulfate undergoes a physical transformation. The small, soft lead sulfate crystals that form during normal discharge gradually recrystallize into large, hard, insoluble crystals. This process, sulfation, is accelerated by heat, by prolonged discharge, and by time. Once lead sulfate has recrystallized into hard, insoluble crystals, normal charging cannot dissolve it. The crystals coat the active surface of the lead plates, reducing the area available for the electrochemical reaction. The battery's capacity drops. It cannot hold a charge. It is effectively dead, not because anything is physically broken, but because the chemistry has shifted into a state from which normal charging cannot recover it. This is the condition that the battery replacement industry counts on. Sulfation is the #1 cause of premature lead-acid battery failure, and it produces batteries that appear to be dead, that cannot start a car, that fail to hold a charge, but that still have their physical structure intact. The plates are not corroded through. The case is not cracked. The cells are not shorted. The battery is a sulfated battery in need of chemical restoration, not a broken battery in need of replacement. Here is where magnesium sulfate enters the picture. When magnesium sulfate is dissolved in water and introduced into the electrolyte of a sulfated lead-acid battery, several things happen simultaneously. The magnesium ions in solution compete with the lead ions at the crystal surface. This competitive ion exchange disrupts the stability of the lead sulfate crystals, making the crystal lattice less stable and more susceptible to dissolution during charging. The magnesium does not dissolve the lead sulfate through direct chemical reaction. It destabilizes the crystal structure sufficiently that electrical charging, which was previously unable to dissolve the hardened crystals, can now break them down progressively. Simultaneously, the sulfate ions contributed by the dissolved magnesium sulfate increase the sulfate concentration in the electrolyte, which modestly improves the conductivity of the solution and provides additional reaction substrate for the restoration charging process. The restoration process is not instantaneous. A severely sulfated battery that has been sitting discharged for months may require multiple charging cycles over several days before meaningful capacity is recovered. But the chemistry is genuine. The magnesium ion disruption of the sulfate crystal lattice is a real electrochemical phenomenon, not a placebo effect. Battery manufacturers are aware of this chemistry. The technical literature on lead-acid battery failure modes and recovery techniques documents sulfation and the conditions that reverse it. Fleet vehicle maintenance operations, organizations responsible for maintaining large numbers of vehicles and strongly motivated by the economics of extending battery life, have used Epsom salt restoration techniques for decades. The reason this knowledge has not reached the typical car owner is straightforward. The battery replacement industry has no interest in promoting a $2 treatment that eliminates a significant portion of its customer base, and the information, while available in technical literature and in the knowledge of experienced mechanics, has no commercial sponsor to amplify it to a mass consumer audience. The practical restoration process requires understanding what type of battery failure is being addressed and what type is not. Magnesium sulfate restoration is effective specifically for sulfation, the hardened lead sulfate crystal condition described above. It is not effective for batteries with physically damaged plates, shorted cells, or electrolyte that has been lost through evaporation or leakage to the point where the plates are exposed. These batteries require replacement. How do you determine whether a battery is sulfated versus genuinely failed? Several indicators suggest sulfation rather than terminal failure. The battery is old but not ancient. Sulfation develops over 1 to several years of undercharging or neglect, and a very old battery may have multiple failure modes. The battery fails to hold a charge but still shows some voltage when tested. A completely dead battery with shorted cells typically shows dramatically reduced voltage. The battery failure developed gradually rather than suddenly. Sudden complete failure is more consistent with a shorted cell or a broken internal connection than with sulfation. A battery that starts the car weakly in cold weather but fails to start in very cold conditions is a classic presentation of sulfation. The reduced plate surface area limits the battery's cold cranking capacity before the total capacity is dramatically reduced. The restoration procedure begins with inspecting the battery. Conventional flooded lead-acid batteries have removable caps on each cell, the 6 caps visible on the top of most conventional batteries. Remove these caps and inspect the electrolyte level. The electrolyte should cover the plates with approximately ½ inch to 1 inch of liquid above them. If the electrolyte is low, distilled water should be added to bring the level up before any restoration attempt. If the battery uses sealed or maintenance-free construction, the type without removable caps, the Epsom salt restoration method is not applicable through the standard approach. Some mechanics apply the treatment through the vent holes of sealed batteries, but this requires more advanced knowledge of the specific battery construction and is not appropriate for all sealed designs. For conventional flooded batteries with accessible cells, the restoration solution is prepared by dissolving approximately 1 teaspoon of magnesium sulfate, Epsom salt, per cell in warm distilled water. A standard 6-cell 12-volt car battery contains 6 cells, so 6 teaspoons of Epsom salt dissolved in distilled water. The warm water is used to ensure complete dissolution. Undissolved crystals introduced into the battery could cause problems. The solution is introduced into each cell through the open caps, using a syringe or a turkey baster for controlled application. Each cell receives enough solution to bring the electrolyte level to the appropriate height, not flooding the cells, simply restoring the electrolyte to proper level with the magnesium sulfate solution. The caps are replaced, and the battery is connected to a slow charger, a trickle charger operating at 1 to 2 amps rather than a fast charger. Slow charging is critical for restoration because the low current gives the magnesium ions time to destabilize the sulfate crystals before the charging current attempts to dissolve them. Fast charging at high current on a severely sulfated battery produces heat without adequately restoring capacity. The battery should be charged for 12 to 24 hours on the trickle charger, then tested. Many severely sulfated batteries require 2 to 3 cycles of this treatment. Introduce the solution, trickle charge, test, repeat, before meaningful capacity recovery is achieved. The chemistry and the procedure are real. The limitations are also real, and understanding them prevents disappointment. Magnesium sulfate restoration works on sulfation. It does not work on everything that kills batteries. A battery that fails the cell test, where one or more cells show dramatically lower voltage than the others, indicating an internal short or broken internal connection, cannot be restored through any chemical treatment. A battery with plates that have been corroded through by chronic overcharging cannot be restored. A battery that has been completely discharged to 0 volts for an extended period may have irreversible sulfation that even the magnesium treatment cannot address. The success rate of this technique, based on reported outcomes from mechanics and hobbyists who have applied it, is highest on batteries that are 1 to 4 years old, that show weak performance rather than complete failure, and that have a documented history of undercharging, short trip driving, extended storage without a maintenance charger. For these batteries, the success rate reported in the literature and in practical accounts is substantial. The majority of batteries with this profile respond to treatment. For batteries that are very old, that show evidence of multiple failure modes, or that have been completely dead for extended periods, the success rate is lower and replacement may ultimately be necessary. Here is the market structure that explains why a $2 restoration method is not mentioned on the battery replacement display at the auto parts store. Interstate Battery Johnson Controls, which manufactures Die-Hard, Duralast, and other private label batteries, and the other major battery manufacturers generate revenue from battery sales. A successful restoration technique that extends battery life by 1 to 3 years represents, for each restored battery, 1 fewer replacement sale. At an average retail price of $120 per battery and millions of battery replacements per year, the financial incentive to suppress this information is substantial. The auto parts retail chains, AutoZone, O'Reilly, Advance Auto Parts, generate significant margin from battery sales and installation services. A customer who walks in with a failing battery and walks out with a $2 bag of Epsom salt is not the transaction these companies are structured to produce. The typical mechanic who recommends battery replacement is not acting in bad faith. Many mechanics are simply not aware of the restoration technique because their training focused on diagnosis and replacement rather than restoration chemistry, and the economic reality of a shop environment, where labor time is the primary cost, makes the restoration procedure, which requires multiple charging cycles over days, less practical than a straightforward replacement that can be completed in 20 minutes. The information exists. Automotive hobbyists, battery technicians, and fleet maintenance operations have been applying it for generations. It appears in the SAE technical papers that automotive engineers read, in battery maintenance manuals from the mid-20th century, and in the practical knowledge of mechanics who learned through experience rather than formal training. It does not appear on the label of the Epsom salt at the pharmacy, next to the battery replacement display at the auto parts store, or in the advice of the technician who tests your battery and tells you it needs to be replaced. Here is the synthesis. Lead-acid battery sulfation, the hardening of lead sulfate crystals on the battery plates, is the primary cause of premature battery failure. It is reversible through chemistry. Magnesium sulfate introduced into the electrolyte destabilizes the sulfate crystal lattice sufficiently that trickle charging can dissolve the crystals and restore plate surface area. Capacity recovers. The battery works again. The treatment costs $2 in Epsom salt and requires a trickle charger and several days of patience. It does not work on every failed battery. Physically damaged batteries, shorted cells, and severely neglected batteries may be beyond restoration. But for the most common presentation of premature battery failure in vehicles that have been primarily used for short trips or stored without maintenance charging, it works with documented consistency. $100 to $200 for a new battery, $2 for Epsom salt and the knowledge of what to do with it. The battery does not know the difference between a new electrolyte and a restored one. It responds to the chemistry. Magnesium sulfate changes the chemistry. If this changed how you think about the battery the mechanic told you needs to be replaced, hit the like button. Share it with someone who just bought a new battery for a car that only needed $2 of chemistry.